Hello there. I am doing a bind off on my leg warmers, which are just about finished. The first one is done, so I've got my first one here, and then here's my second one, just in time for the weather to start warming up. Go figure. But I just have like a quarter of the last stitches to bind off at the bottom, and I thought maybe now would be a nice time to sit, drink a little beverage, and maybe just reflect on some of the things that I've been doing in my first full year of fiber crafts. I don't feel like doing a second camera, so I'm just gonna do this thing where you just hold it up. It's really annoying, but I don't care. I'm doing a tubular bind off, which is a sewn bind off. I just like the way it looks on a hem. I did, is it Italian tubular cast on? Anyway, I did that cast on to start, and I thought I would do the same at the bottom to finish it off. Not that it really matters, I just kind of like the look of it. I like the way it stretches, so that's what I'm doing. I'm using one of these 3D printed needles that I like so much. They have these huge long eyelets here, so that it's really easy to fit yarn of whatever thickness in here, and it works for really short ends too. I don't think that's going to be an issue here. I like it for sewing in ends for just about anything over any other kind of needle style. So these leg warmers are mostly taken from the Lion brand. I think they're called the Tweedy leg warmers, but really the only thing that's the same is that it's a 6x2 rib pattern. But I pretty much did whatever I wanted as far as like the cuff lengths go. I just used math to figure out what the decrease rate was going to be. So I guess you could say it was that pattern, but also not really. I've already tried filming this video a couple times before, but I was never quite happy with it. I didn't really want it to be all the things that I made in 2024 sort of video. I think those are fun. I like watching those. But especially at this point, it's kind of late. I guess I could still do it if I want to, but I feel like it's a little bit late in the year to be doing that sort of video, I suppose. And I'm not going through all of the patterns and talking about the yarns and such. I kind of more wanted to do like a overall, here's what I did in a year sort of reflection. To be fair, this is not my first year of fiber crafts. I have been doing fiber crafts, specifically knitting mostly, since I was a kid, actually. But it wasn't actually until the beginning of last year where I really took off and started knitting as like a primary focus for hobbies, I guess. I think a lot of my fiber crafting and sewing too has been driven by the desire to have clothes that I have made myself. I really like to know how things are made and why you do things in a particular way. And as a person who, I guess probably a lot of people have experienced this, but I don't like clothes shopping. I don't like just having to be limited by whatever styles are being made in stores. I don't like trying on clothes and finding that the armhole size is wrong or the bust size doesn't scale well. I mean, that's like a pretty common thing. If you want anything that's shaped, it's not going to work out for you unless you're like an average shape, I guess. So something that I've really been enjoying with sewing is making something to fit my own proportions exactly the way that I want it to. I remember years ago sitting and dreaming about making my own sweaters. I think I was really frustrated with the fact that I couldn't find sweaters in stores that I was going to at the time. I couldn't find sweaters that were made of a material that didn't feel like it was going to pill very quickly. And so at that point, I thought I was going to be making something out of cotton. As it turns out, I don't really like cotton sweaters all that much. But years later, I finally learned enough that I can construct my own sweaters out of whatever wool that I feel like I would like to use. So years ago, I got into a beanie knitting kick, and I went to my first local yarn store, which happens to no longer be in business, unfortunately, and I picked out what at the time felt like incredibly expensive yarn. I'd always thought that knitting my own socks would be really cool, so I also picked out a skein of yarn that I thought would be good sock yarn. It wasn't. It was a single ply, 100% wool. I couldn't get the gusset to be the right size, and I just got frustrated with how much time it took and gave up. And it sat on my shelf just looking at me for years until this January, for whatever reason. I think something clicked in my brain, and I thought maybe at this point, with all the things I had been learning over the last few years about shaping things and how you can figure that out with math, I think my brain was just ready to tackle that again. And so last January, I finished my first pair of socks. They weren't particularly great. The yarn was not ideal, but and I kind of had the idea that the little bamboo double-pointed needles were probably not the tool that I wanted to use either. And so I went to what is now my local yarn store. I picked out a new sock yarn that I liked the look of. I got a pair of circular needles for magic loop, and I made my first good pair of socks. And that's kind of been one of my go-tos for a small project ever since. A cool thing about sock knitting is that, in my opinion, it teaches you various skills that are of use for making just about anything that has any kind of shaping. So when I saw the Florence Miller step-by-step sweater pattern in my YouTube recommendations, in that week after I finished my first real pair of socks, I gave that a watch, and I realized pretty quickly that actually making a sweater wasn't all that challenging, and I thought it was something I could do relatively easily. A lot of it is just due to how well put together that video was. I feel like being able to rewind sections and hear the explanations really prepared me and helped me feel confident with whatever steps I was going to have to do. So the sweater I finished is actually the one that I'm wearing right now. It's not my best sweater, being the first one that I did. I pretty much, aside from some stitch count errors, because apparently I can't count, it's pretty much mostly the way that she wrote it in her pattern. I think I made like size large or extra large, something like that. And it's not my favorite sweater, but it is a sweater I wear the most because it's kind of almost like a sweatshirt where I'll just throw it on whenever I want another warm layer, and I don't really care. It's fisherman's wool in brown heather, and first off, I just like this neutral brown color, but also it's kind of perfect because it doesn't show if I spill anything on it. Unlike other lighter sweaters that I have where I'm afraid to wear them just because I'm kind of a messy person. But this sweater, I can just wear it whenever and it doesn't really matter. I think I sometimes lean stuff against it and it's making it pill in the front, but overall as a sweater, this yarn is holding up really well. So I'm quite happy with this one. I could tell pretty quickly that there were some things in the pattern that I would choose to do differently if I was going to do it again. So that's what I did. I got more yarn and immediately made another one, but with some modifications. I made the arms bigger. I added more short rows to the front. Like, this is fine, but it still tends to sit kind of straight across a little bit. It kind of comes across almost boat neck like. So I added a few more short rows so it sits a little bit lower on my other sweater. I did the stripes. I learned how to do a jogless color change. I changed the way the sleeve decreases go, and I did a rapid decrease just before the cuff so that I could get a gather in at the cuff, which is what I prefer. At this point, I thought maybe I should try to do something a little bit different. And I think it was at this point where the step-by-step cardigan pattern and tutorial came out. I decided pretty quickly I didn't want to use the pattern that she had made. I wanted to make something that was in a smaller gauge yarn of some kind. And I had the idea I wanted to make something that was cropped, more tightly fit. And so I found a pattern that I thought would work for me. And so then I made two cardigans with Barocco Lana's Light, which is another raw wool. And I believe this is like a sport weight, I think. I chose the pattern that I thought would work for me, but at this point I felt pretty confident making changes depending on the different qualities that I wanted to see in a sweater. So I made all kinds of modifications. I found that I generally don't like to do sleeve decreases the same way that a pattern describes. Usually I'm better off kind of envisioning the sort of shape that I want it to be and then doing math to figure out whatever decreases will get me the shape that I'm looking for. I chose to do the double knit button band, which at first felt like it was taking forever, but I think I prefer it to the look of like a standard single layer rib button band. It just feels more polished, I guess. I could tell that my tension was kind of all over the place, but the second cardigan that I made was significantly improved. So at this point, it was somewhere around maybe the end of May or so, and I was starting to feel as though I was ready to look for another direction to take fiber crafts, and I stumbled across a really interesting video about knitting in wartime. And something that really caught my attention in this video was talking about spinning wool for since there was a shortage of wool, the government would recommend that people would spin their own wool to make things out of, so there would be more wool presumably for soldiers. Spinning is not new to me. It's another thing that I got to try when I was a kid, but for whatever reason, it didn't really sink in as maybe spinning being something that I could use to make garments for myself, other than being just kind of a fun thing I did when I was a kid, I guess. So that sent me down a rabbit hole of contacting various fiber mills near me. I found a guild that I eventually joined and got a drop spindle and then a spinning wheel. At this point, I wasn't new to crafting communities in my area. The shop that's close to me has a night where people will get together and we'll sit and knit or whatever. But the guild is a little bit different. And I guess it's because on the regular knitting meetup days, you're kind of on your own. You could still ask people if they have an opinion for fixing something, or maybe how to do something a little bit differently, or if you're trying to figure out what to do for a yarn choice for something. But the way my guild functions, I guess it's kind of with an emphasis on education. Every time there's a knitting meetup, usually they'll pick like a technique or talk about maybe a book that has something interesting in it. And I'm usually coming away from a knitting group having learned something. Same with spinning also. That's been really great as a beginner spinner, learning how to do different things. And the guild does other stuff too. Like they'll do a dye day, for example. I didn't do it last year, but they got cochineal and madder and did like red, pinky red sort of natural dyes. And they'll do community events. They had a table for the Shenandoah Fiber Festival. That was really cool. They'll do local demonstrations for history things. They have a relationship with a local shop that does weaving. It's a lot of fun. I've been really enjoying it. And just making friends with people. I'm pretty sure I'm the youngest person there. I'm fortunate to be able to go in at times when other people my age can't, usually in the middle of the day. But mostly I joined the guild so I could learn to spin, and I've been enjoying that a lot. Most of the things I've made out of handspun so far have been accessories. I made a scarf hood by Pearl Soho that was a free pattern, where I think I mostly followed the pattern for that one. I decided to taper the bottom of the scarf instead of leaving it square like the pattern does. That one I made out of alpaca that I spun. And then with this other alpaca that I have that is a much shorter staple, and so therefore much harder to spin, I made some fingerless mitts with a brioche stitch. I have heard it said that it's a good idea to do your first brioche stitch item with 2 colors. That way you can fix it easier if you make a mistake. And I did, and it was very challenging to figure it out with the same color all the way through. I feel like it does a good job reinforcing maybe the thinner spots in the yarn so that sections of it don't let more cold air through. They're pretty warm. I tried to get a fleece at the Shenandoah Fiber Festival, but I got there later on in the day, I think on the second day. And apparently, if you want the best choice in fleeces, they say you should go like immediately, at least at the smaller ones. Maybe this won't be the case at the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, which I'm hoping to go to this year. But there was only a few left when I went, and nothing was particularly suited. So it just so happened that in my hometown, there was a smaller fiber festival a few weeks later. I went pretty close to opening, and there was a whole bunch of fleeces there from some local sheep breeders. So I was able to get my first one. It had a lot of... It wasn't the easiest fleece to start with. It didn't have too much vegetable matter in it, which was kind of like the only thing I could say about it, really. They said it was skirted, but it had sun bleach damage. The tips were really muddy. It was a really muddy fleece. Hopefully mostly muddy. I guess you can't really tell. Maybe just assume that it's not mud. But probably the most problematic part of it, I couldn't tell in the lighting in the room we were in that it had a lot of yellow staining on the fibers. So when I took it home and saw how yellow it was, I kind of panicked a little bit, and I thought I needed to wash it as soon as possible so I could stop the staining from getting worse. I have since learned if you have a 9-pound fleece, don't try to wash it all at once, because it's going to be a lot of work, and also good luck drying 9 pounds of fleece also. I know better now. We have Maryland Sheep and Wool coming up soon. I need to look to see what other local ones are going to be in my area. I'm kind of hoping at this point to find maybe like a black fleece would be nice. Maybe something that's brown or gray. Something that's not just white, though the fleece that I have now, it kind of ends up being, well, it's actually what I'm working on right now. It's kind of ends up being more like a cream color rather than white, but it would be really nice to get something that was like a naturally darker color without having to dye it, I guess. So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye out for. But really at this point, I have enough fleece and also commercial roving that I could probably tone it down a little bit. But I think that's kind of one of those things, once you start the craft, these things just kind of show up. After a few months of spinning with a spinning wheel, I kind of started feeling like it would be nice to pick up my spindle again. I think there's something that happens. You start out as a beginner spinner, and people say you should start with a spindle, but everybody wants to get a wheel, which wheels are great, and I love my wheel. 2 wheels now, actually. I love having spinning wheels, and they can make a lot of yarn, but there's something kind of nice about spinning small amounts with just the spindle instead. I started using my drop spindle again, broke it, and then thought maybe it would be a good idea to try some other kinds. So we 3D printed a Turkish spindle, which was very fun, very portable, slow to wind. but you can ply from the ball, which is very cool. But I kind of thought it would be fun to have medieval spindle sticks. It's a kind of spindle where you hold it in your hand and you twiddle it with your fingers to make it spin. And something about that particular action seemed really appealing to me. And one day, kind of not really having anything else I wanted to do, I just pulled out some X-Acto knives and I made myself a spindle. And I've since made a bunch more. They're just take a few hours to make. I think it's probably my favorite way to spin yarn. It's not the fastest way, but I can take it places with me. And for something like this, where there's thick and thin spots, and every now and then I want to reinforce the thin spots with just a single ply of yarn, it's nice to have my spindle with me and I can just make a little extra if I have to, or make a bunch of it and then put it on a little bobbin so it's just ready to go and I can just kind of keep knitting from it if I feel like it. They can make some pretty fine yarn and they're really lightweight, so you don't have to deal with the yarn breaking because the spindle is too heavy. Probably my favorite. I really like spinning that way. At this point, it was the end of the year. I improvised my first cardigan with a bulky yarn. Originally, I was looking at patterns and I searched through all of the bulky yarn patterns, didn't find anything that I particularly liked the look of, and then I thought, well, let's just use math and do it myself. And so I did. And it wasn't actually really all that scary. I think I've seen videos of people talking about how to improvise your own cardigan. If you can do a gauge swatch and do a little bit of simple math and have an idea of what sort of shapes that you want it to be in, as far as like how wide you want the sweater to be, how long, it's actually pretty simple and not all that scary. I think the scariest part is not knowing if it's going to work out and if you're going to like it when it's done. But I just spent a lot of time thinking about what design elements I wanted to have on the cardigan. And once I drew it out and had all of the numbers that I needed, it was pretty straightforward making it work. At the end of my first year of knitting, I had 6 finished sweaters, one of them being something I made up on my own, something like 12 pairs of socks, and a whole bunch of other accessories that I had made. I still have a whole bunch of yarn that I haven't knitted into anything yet. I feel like over the last year, I have picked up a lot of techniques and skills that I feel like I can use to make pretty much anything that I want to, which is really cool. The last video I put up, I made a teapot sweater. No pattern, it was just something that I improvised all on my own, just using math and my gauge swatches, and I did it out of hand-spun yarn, some of it that was done with a spindle, and I thought it worked out really well. I have to be careful, I don't want to spill it everywhere, but I mean, look at that, that's so cool, and it works. As far as plans for the future, I have 2 more sweaters immediately planned, though I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do. Both of those I'm pretty much going to be coming up with my own pattern and numbers and everything once again, just because I'm pretty sure I can do it, so I'm just going to do it. One of them is going to be a cardigan. Actually, it'll be my first garment using superwash wool, which we'll see how that goes. I've been using all raw wool so far. I understand that superwash will stretch for cardigans, so I'm a little nervous about that, but it's a cardigan. I think it's going to be fine. The second one is going to be with that Lana's Light again. I'm not really sure how it picks up on camera, but it's kind of like a dark, moody, purpley color, and I think this will make a really nice top rather than a sweater, I guess. I'm going to try to do some bust shaping, I think. Probably 3/4 sleeves. I might look at some stitch dictionaries and see if I can come up with an interesting lace detail to put maybe on the bottom edge, maybe on the edge of the sleeves. I haven't decided yet, but I kind of know the general shape I want this to be, and I just have to come up with specific details before I get started. Other than that, I've like a wall of sock yarn things that I need to make. I don't think I'm ever going to get bored of making socks. I don't think I'm much of a summer knitting person. I got like a tank top pattern. I thought I would maybe give that a try at some point. I have some shawls in mind that I think I would like to do. I would like to make a sweater totally out of handspun at some point. I think that would be really cool. No idea as far as like what I want the shape to be or colors or anything like that. I figure once I'm done making the other two, maybe like just two things at a time, and then maybe I'll figure that out at some point. I haven't done a color work sweater yet. I like color work, so I kind of feel like a color work yoke sweater would be really cool. Makes sense to add to the collection of sweaters that I have. But I also kind of feel like I'm not the sort of person who just wants to make something for the sake of making it. The whole idea was to fill out my wardrobe of things that I was lacking. So I'm not really interested in just making whatever. I'm kind of looking at the colors that I wear and the clothes that I use most and trying to think of what I could make in colors that I would actually use, or something that would be like a little bit interesting and push a little bit, but not too crazy, I guess, but also shapes that I actually need. So I'm not really looking to have 100 sweaters necessarily, just enough for the amount that I actually want to cycle through, and then maybe have a couple other special ones for every now and then. So I don't know, we'll see. I'll probably figure it out as I go. I don't think it would work for me in the way that I like to make my socks, but it would be really cool to have a circular sock knitting machine. We could make one of those. That would be fun. I could make socks for other people, and I would like that. But it's a little bit silly. I think it would make more sense, though, I'm not sure I have the room for it, to get like a flatbed knitting machine. If I could find one, I would like to do that. That would be very cool. And that's the last stitch, I think. Cool, and I overestimated the tail. That's pretty good. So I made 3 skeins of yarn because I thought I was going to be making the yarn much thicker than it ended up being. That's kind of a funny thing about learning to spin. As you get more and more comfortable with it, it's really hard to spin thicker yarn. You keep trying to spin thinner and thinner yarn. So I think it was one of those things where I finished the 3rd skein of yarn, which took like a month and a half to make all 3. And I stopped and I looked at it and I thought, wait a minute, this is actually really thin yarn. So it's thin enough that I ended up only needing 2 skeins. Let's see, how much do I have left? It's the tiniest little ball. Hang on. And of course I reinforced thin spots a fair amount as I went along. But I just have this tiniest little ball left of the 2nd skein of yarn, plus a whole 3rd one. So this ended up being 2 skeins of very fine fingering to lace wake yarn for the most part. Some sections were a little bit thicker, but maybe just like a heavy fingering weight. That's pretty good. I should weave in ends and actually try it on. It's still kind of cold outside at this point. Not like it was in the dead of January, but we're still getting like 20-degree Fahrenheit weather at night. So I'll probably still get use out of these, even though it's not as cold as it was. I'm just hoping that they stay up when I'm walking. They need a string of elastic to stay up, but they are warm. Well, that's good to have that done, though. But yeah, that was a full year of fiber crafts for me. I'm not really sure that I don't think that I have any real goals other than just making more stuff. But I mean, it seems like things just kind of come up. I'll see a video or something will catch my attention and then I'll get sucked into the rabbit hole. So who knows what I'm going to end up doing over the next year or however long I'm going to be doing this, but I'm excited to see what other things come up and what more things that I learn. Thank you for joining me as I sit and talk about just whatever fiber crafts from the last year. I don't know how long this is going to be, so thank you for sticking with me this whole time if you did. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you whatever the next thing is that I decide to do. And goodbye.